There's a cassette tape somewhere in my memory. The soft, mechanical click of flipping from side A to side B. That click was part of the ritual. You couldn't just skip ahead, you had to wait, flip, press play, and trust that the next sequence of songs was worth the patience. And somehow, it always was. Then came the compact disc. That first time holding one, the way it caught light differently than anything else in the room. Slimmer, more serious, like music had decided to grow up and get a little futuristic. And burning your own CDs, your own playlists, your own sequencing felt like a genuinely creative act. You were curating something, deciding what went next to what. Then an Arcos jukebox showed up in my life with 4 gigabytes of storage, and I thought, that's it. That's everything. 4 gigabytes felt like the whole library of Alexandria in my pocket. Now I can search a lyric I half remember from a song I heard once in 1997 and have it playing in 11 seconds. The technology got so good, it became invisible. But here's what I keep coming back to. The technology was never really the point. Every format, the magnetic tape, the laser red disc, the compressed digital file, the streaming signal, was just a delivery mechanism, the vessel. What arrived at the other end was always the same thing. Something that has no physical form, no weight, no measurable dimension, and yet can completely reorganize the interior of a human being in under 4 minutes. Music did that through all of it. Through the hiss of analog and the pristine silence of digital. Through tinny transistor radio speakers and whatever excellent headphones I'm wearing today. It kept doing exactly what it's always done. Radio is worth pausing on for a moment, because when you actually think about what radio is, frequencies of sound moving invisibly through the air, catching on an antenna, resolving into a song that was recorded somewhere by someone you'll never meet, delivered simultaneously to everyone within range. It sounds like something out of a story, a technology that if you explained it to someone who had never seen it, would seem impossible. And yet, we grew up treating it as background noise. The magic was always there. We just got used to it. What strikes me now, looking back across all those formats and devices and upgrades, is that my relationship with music was deepening the whole time, even when I thought I was just upgrading hardware. Every new technology opened a slightly different door into the same extraordinary room. The cassette taught patience and sequence. The CD gave me agency over what came next. The MP3 player handed me abundance. Streaming gave me access to everything humanity has ever recorded, which sounds like an ending, but is really just a new kind of beginning. Because now the question isn't, how do I find the music? The question is, what do I do with it once I have it? How deeply can I actually listen? How much of what's in there can I actually perceive? Every era of technology asks something different of us as listeners. And maybe that's what technology at its best actually does. It changes not just what we can access, but how we pay attention to what we find. The tape flipped. The laser read the disc. The signal left a tower and found your antenna. And somewhere in all of that invisible infrastructure, a song arrived and did something to you that the technology could carry but never explain. At some point, passive listening stopped being enough. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, somewhere between owning decent speakers and buying a second pair of headphones just to hear what the first pair was missing. What started as enjoying music became something closer to studying it. And the deeper in I went, the more I realized how much had always been there, waiting to be heard by someone paying close enough attention. There's a difference between hearing a song and actually listening to it. Hearing is what happens when music is on. Listening is something else. It's a posture almost, leaning in, narrowing the field, letting the rest of the room fall away until there's nothing left but the sound and whatever's happening inside you in response to it. The tools matter here more than people expect. Same song, different headphones, and you're in a different room. A pair with emphasized low end will give you the bass line as a physical thing, something you feel as much as hear.
A more analytical pair pulls the mid-range forward, suddenly exposing the texture in a vocalist's breath, the slight imperfection in a guitar note that makes it human. Neither is more correct, they're just different lenses on the same image. I've spent time learning equalizers for the same reason. An EQ isn't a way to fix music, it's a way to explore it. Pull the high frequencies up slightly and the room the recording was made in becomes audible. Drop the mids and the rhythm section comes forward, like it's been waiting to be heard this clearly the whole time. You're not changing the music, you're changing your angle of approach to it. What I find interesting is how this maps onto attention itself. The music was always complex, always full of layered decisions made by producers and engineers and musicians who spent years developing the ability to hear things most ears slide past. The audiophile's pursuit is really a pursuit of perception, the slow expansion of what you're capable of noticing. And there's something almost meditative about it. When the volume is up and the headphones are on and the focus is real, everything else genuinely recedes. Not because you're trying to block it out, but because the music is so occupying that there's simply no room left for anything else. That quality of full absorption, where your attention is singular and complete, is rare in ordinary life. Music can reliably produce it. What's strange is that the better you get at listening, the more there is to hear. You don't reach a ceiling, the detail keeps going. A song you've heard 300 times reveals something on the 301st listen that you have no explanation for missing before. It was there, you just weren't ready for it yet. The equipment is part of it, yes, but the real instrument is the ear, and behind the ear, the mind that decides how much of itself to bring to the experience. Most music is encountered at a fraction of its actual depth, which means most of what it has to offer is still waiting, patient, in the spaces between the notes we've learned to expect. There are songs I return to when things get hard. Not consciously, usually. I'll find myself reaching for a particular album the way you reach for something familiar in the dark. Something in the body knows before the mind has decided. Music has always done this for me. Held things when holding them myself felt like too much. The right song at the right moment can do something that conversation can't, that rest can't, that even time sometimes can't. It can locate you, remind you that what you're feeling has a shape, has a sound, has been felt before by someone who found a way to put it into 4 minutes of arrangement and release. I've been curious about why this works. Not to explain it away, but because understanding something doesn't always diminish it. Sometimes it deepens it. What research keeps circling back to is that music is one of the few things that activates nearly every region of the brain simultaneously. Memory, emotion, movement, language, prediction. When a song plays, you're not processing it in one place. You're processing it everywhere at once, which might be why it reaches things that other inputs don't. It's not arriving through a single door. It's arriving through all of them. Certain tones do specific things. A slow tempo in a minor key can create something that feels like being held. Not sad exactly, but understood. A driving rhythm at the right frequency can pull you out of a flat emotional state before you've even registered that it's doing it. There are pieces of music I've used the way other people use medication, not as a replacement, but as a recalibration, a way of moving the internal weather. What I find harder to explain is the inspiring effect. Certain arrangements do something to the mind that feels almost architectural. They build something, clear a space. I've had ideas arrive mid-song that I'm fairly certain wouldn't have arrived in silence, as if the music created the interior conditions for a thought that was waiting for the right room to form in. This is personal enough that I hesitate to generalize. What works for me might land completely differently for someone else. Music's therapeutic effects seem almost tailored to the individual, which is part of what makes it remarkable. It's not a universal prescription. It's something more like a private language that you develop with sound over the course of a lifetime. The song that broke something open for you at 23 might do nothing for someone else. And that's not a failure of the music, it's a testament to how deeply personal the relationship becomes. Somewhere between the frequency and the feeling, music stops being a thing you listen to and becomes a record of who you've been, and occasionally, a map toward who you're trying to become.
Some songs you hear once and they're gone before they finish. Others lodge themselves somewhere so deep that 40 years later, 8 notes in, you're back in a specific kitchen, a specific afternoon, a specific version of yourself you thought you'd left behind. The brain doesn't apply the same logic to music that it applies to most things, and I find that gap between what stays and what disappears genuinely fascinating. Part of it is expectation. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly modeling what comes next in any sequence. Music works with that machinery in a very particular way. A melody that sets up a pattern and then slightly subverts it, arriving a beat late, resolving to a note you didn't quite expect, produces a small charge, a tiny neurological reward. Too predictable and the brain stops paying attention. Too unpredictable and it can't find a foothold. The songs that stay tend to live in that narrow corridor in between, familiar enough to follow, surprising enough to keep you engaged. But that's only part of the story, because plenty of technically sophisticated music disappears, and plenty of deceptively simple music endures for generations. There's something else happening. Emotion encodes memory. This is one of the more settled findings in neuroscience. Experiences that carry emotional weights get stored differently, more vividly, more durably, with more retrieval pathways leading back to them. A song that arrives at the right moment, during a first drive alone, during a loss, during something opening in your life, gets sealed into the memory alongside whatever was happening. Later, hearing it again doesn't just play the song, it plays the whole moment. Which is why music functions as a kind of personal time travel in a way nothing else quite manages. A photograph shows you what something looked like. A song can make you feel what it felt like, the specific emotional temperature of a moment you haven't visited in years. And then there are the songs that stick for reasons that resist any clean explanation. A chord change that does something to the chest, a vocal tone that sounds like it knows something, a bridge that arrives at exactly the moment the song needed to go somewhere else and does. These aren't accidents. They're the result of someone, a songwriter, an arranger, a producer, who felt their way towards something true and found a way to record it. The songs that stay are the ones where all of it aligned, the right frequencies at the right moment in the right life. Which means your personal canon of unforgettable music is really a kind of autobiography, a record of the moments when something outside you made contact with something inside you, and neither was quite the same afterward.
Before playlists, before algorithms, before I had any say in what played next, there was the radio. And for a long time, I think I underestimated what an extraordinary thing it actually was. Think about it plainly for a moment. Sound is recorded in a studio. That recording is converted into electromagnetic waves, invisible, weightless, moving at the speed of light and broadcasted outward from a tower, in every direction simultaneously. Those waves pass through walls, through weather, across hundreds of miles, and land on an antenna the size of a small wire. The antenna converts them back into electrical signals. The speakers convert those signals back into sound. And what you hear is a voice, a guitar, a full orchestra, indistinguishable from the original. If you describe that to someone who has never encountered it, it sounds like a kind of miracle. To those of us who grew up with it, it was just Tuesday afternoon in the car. There's something worth examining in that. How quickly the remarkable becomes ordinary. How fast the threshold moves. Radio was science fiction made real, and within one generation, it became background noise. We stopped noticing it. We stopped finding it strange that music could travel invisibly through the air and reconstitute itself perfectly on the other side. But I remember moments, usually as a child, when the strangeness would briefly return. When a song would come through clearly from a station hundreds of miles away, late at night, the signal slightly wavering, and there was something almost eerie about it. Someone was playing music somewhere. It was traveling through the dark, and it arrived in my room. What radio also did, and this gets lost in the on-demand era, is create shared experience at scale. The same song playing for thousands of people simultaneously. People who would never meet, never know each other existed, all hearing the same chorus at the same moment. There's a strange intimacy in that, a kind of invisible commons. Streaming gave us infinite choice, which is genuinely extraordinary, but it also privatized the experience. Your queue and line are probably nothing alike. We're no longer in the same room, sonically speaking. We're each in our own perfectly curated world. Something was gained, something was quietly given up. The signal still travels. The frequencies are still out there, moving through walls and weather and the space between buildings. It's just that most of us stopped listening to them, stopped finding it worth remarking on that sound could travel invisibly, arrive perfectly, and fill a room with something someone created far away and long ago. There's a playlist in my head from when I was 17. I couldn't write it down from memory, but if a song from it came on right now, something would shift before I'd even processed the recognition. A feeling, almost physical. The specific gravity of that particular time. Music collects us, not in a neat, archival way, more the way sediment collects, layer by layer, a record of what was happening when certain songs arrived. Who you were at 22 lives partly in the music you listened to then. And the music knows things about you from that time that you might have since forgotten or decided to forget. This is something I find genuinely strange about the relationship. A song doesn't change. The recording is fixed, but what it means shifts with you. A song you heard during a difficult period and associated with survival can, years later, sound like something else entirely. Like distance, like proof that things moved. The song is the same. You're just hearing it from a different position. There's also the question of identity formation. The music we claim in adolescence functions almost like a declaration. You were the person who listened to this, dressed a certain way, belonged to a particular sonic tribe. The band on your t-shirt was a statement before you had the vocabulary to make it any other way. Music gave shape to an identity that was still being assembled. And it didn't stop there. Each decade brings new music that either reaches you or doesn't. The ones that reach you tend to mark the moment. Whatever was being figured out, whatever was opening or closing, whatever needed a sound to make it feel real. The ones that don't reach you just pass through, and that's fine. The relationship was never meant to be universal. It was always meant to be yours. What I've been thinking about lately is how streaming has changed this. When music was scarcer, when you had a finite number of albums, a limited budget, a local radio station with its own personality, the relationship with individual songs and artists became more intense. You listened to the same record 100 times because it was the one you had. That repetition did something. It built familiarity deep enough to become intimacy. Now, the catalog is infinite, which means the pressure to sit with anything is gone. You can always find something new. And sometimes I wonder what that does to the relationship over time, whether the music of this era will sediment the same way, or whether the sheer volume of it keeps any single song from going deep enough to leave a mark. Abundance is extraordinary, but depth requires duration, and duration requires the willingness to stay. Most people set up their audio and leave it. Find the headphone profile that sounds good, pick a streaming quality, and then more or less forget that any of the settings exist, which is completely reasonable. But it means they're hearing a fixed version of music, one person's decisions about how it should be presented, baked in and unchanging.
An equalizer changes that relationship. Suddenly, you're a participant. You're no longer just receiving the music, you're adjusting your angle of approach to it. And what you find in there, once you start exploring, is that the same recording contains multitudes. Boost the sub-bass, and a track that seemed polished and surface level suddenly reveals a low-end architecture you didn't know was there. The kick drum becomes physical. The bass line turns into something you feel in your chest. Cut the lower mid slightly, and suddenly the mix opens up, like someone cleaned the windows and more light is getting in. Roll off the high frequencies, and an aggressive track becomes something almost meditative. Same song, completely different emotional experience. What I find interesting about this is that it mirrors something about perception generally. What we notice in any experience depends partly on how we've set our attention. Approach something looking for flaws, and that's what you'll find. Approach the same thing looking for what's working, and a different landscape appears. The equalizer makes that literal. You are choosing what to bring forward and what to let recede. There's also something deeply personal about it. An EQ setting that sounds extraordinary to me might sound wrong to someone else, because we're not optimizing towards the same thing. One person wants warmth, another wants precision, another wants to feel the music as a physical event. The equalizer lets you tune the experience to the specific kind of listening you want to do. It's almost a form of self-knowledge, understanding what you're actually after when you put music on. And it compounds. The more time you spend with it, the more refined your ear becomes. You start hearing the decisions made in the mix, where the producer chose to place a sound in the stereo field, what they brought up in the mastering, what they deliberately buried. Music that seems simple reveals a floor plan. Every production is an architecture, and the equalizer is the tool that lets you walk through the rooms. None of this makes the listening less emotional. That's what people sometimes assume, that technical attention crowds out feeling. I'd say the opposite. The deeper you hear, the more there is to respond to. The music doesn't get smaller when you understand it better, it gets larger. And the equalizer, for all its technical appearance, is really just a tool for getting more of yourself into contact with more of what the music actually contains. There are AI systems now that can generate music, convincing music. Music that has melody and rhythm and production value, and sometimes even emotional texture. You can describe a mood, a genre, a tempo, and receive something back in seconds that sounds like it could have been made by a person. And when I sit with that, I find I have two reactions simultaneously: fascination and something I can only describe as concern. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling of watching someone replicate a gesture without understanding what the gesture means. Because here's what I keep returning to. Every piece of music I've loved, every song that has held something for me when I couldn't hold it myself, every recording that has recalibrated something in my internal weather, was made by a human being who felt something they couldn't otherwise express. The music was the only form the feeling could take. The song existed because the person had no other way to say what needed to be said. An AI doesn't have that problem. It doesn't have something pressing to say. It doesn't have a 3 a.m. and the reason to be awake in it. It doesn't have the experience of loss that makes a particular chord progression feel like the only true thing in the room. What it has is pattern, extraordinarily sophisticated pattern, the distilled aesthetic decisions of every human who ever recorded anything, but pattern in the absence of the need that originally generated it. The question this raises isn't really about whether AI music sounds good. Some of it sounds very good. The question is whether what we're responding to when music moves us is the sound itself, or the knowledge that somewhere behind a sound is a person who felt something, who worked to capture it, who offered it to anyone willing to listen. I suspect it's both, but I suspect the second part is doing more work than we typically acknowledge. When I listen to a recording and feel something shift, some interior knot loosen, some forgotten feeling surface, I think I'm responding to the sound and to the implied presence of whoever made it. The music as proof that someone else was here, that someone else felt this, that the feeling has a shape. Technology has always been the vessel, as we said at the beginning, the cassette, the disc, the signal. But the thing the vessel was carrying was always irreducibly human, a person's specific encounter with being alive, distilled into sound, made available to anyone who needed it. AI can generate frequencies. It can model emotion. What I don't yet believe it can do is need to make music. And I wonder if that need, that irreducible human necessity to turn feeling into sound, is the thing that lives at the center of why music moves us at all. What do you think? When music reaches you, really reaches you, what is it that you believe is reaching back?
So here we are. We started with a cassette tape clicking from side A to side B. We ended up asking whether a machine can make something that actually needs to exist. That's a long way to travel. And yet, somehow it all feels like the same conversation. Because underneath all of it, the formats, the frequencies, the neuroscience, the nostalgia, the EQ curves and the streaming algorithms, and the philosophical questions about artificial intelligence, there has been one constant: music, doing what it has always done. It delivered itself through magnetic tape and laser light and radio waves and compressed digital files. It lodged itself into specific moments of specific lives and refused to leave. It held people when holding themselves felt like too much. It built identities before the people wearing them had the language to explain what they were building. It rewarded the listeners who paid close enough attention with layers that kept going deeper without ever reaching a bottom. It traveled invisibly through the air and arrived in rooms where someone needed it, sometimes without that person knowing they needed it until it arrived. That's an extraordinary list of things for an arrangement of sound waves to do. And yet, most of us grew up treating it as background, something to have on, something to fill the silence with, something the algorithm curates while we do other things. What this journey through music and technology keeps returning me to is a simple question about attention. Not the productivity kind, not how to optimize your listening or get more out of your commute. Something quieter than that. The question of what becomes available when you actually show up for something. Because that's what the audiophile is really after. Not better equipment, but fuller contact. That's what the therapeutic effect is: music reaching something because a person was present enough to let it in. That's why certain songs stay and others vanish. The ones that stay arrived when someone was actually there to receive them. That's why the radio felt different from streaming. It put everyone in the same room at the same moment, and presence at scale does something that personalization quietly undoes. The technology has always been the vessel. Every era built a better one, and every era of better vessels made the music more accessible, more portable, more abundant, which is genuinely extraordinary. But abundance without attention is just noise with better production values. What music seems to know, what it has always known across every format and every era, is that it requires something from the listener in return: a willingness to actually be there, to turn the volume up and mean it, to notice what's happening 3 layers down, to let a song that knows something about you do what it came to do. The question I started with was simple: why is music special? And I'm not sure I've answered it. I'm not sure it can be answered. What I can say is that the specialness seems to live in the exchange, in the space between what someone put into the recording and what you bring to the listening. The technology carries that exchange across time and distance and formats, but the exchange itself is irreducibly human. It always has been. The vessel keeps changing. The magic in it doesn't. So the next time you put music on, really put it on with intention, with volume, with your full attention. What do you think you might find that you've been passing over this whole time?